For 45 years, a European monarch turned an entire continent into his private plantation, exporting rubber while the Congo bled. King Leopold II of Belgium reaped wealth for himself and his nation, yet he concealed the carnage behind diplomatic ceremonies and glossy postcards. The silence matters today because the ghosts of those massacres still haunt modern debates over reparations, monuments, and collective memory. This horror was not a single decree or an isolated atrocity. It was a system, one that normalized terror, forced labor, and mass murder in the name of civilizing commerce. The Berlin Conference of 1885 granted Leopold personal sovereignty over the Congo Free State, and from that moment he unleashed a quota-driven rubber economy enforced by the Force Publique, his private army. What no one could see at the time, what would not surface for decades, was the scale of the violence hidden behind official reports that claimed progress and prosperity. The first clues appear in missionary letters, but the full truth waited until a handful of whistleblowers dared to publish it. The scramble for Africa culminated in the Berlin Conference, where European powers carved up the continent with little regard for its peoples. Leopold arrived not as a head of state seeking a colony, but as a private investor demanding personal rule. He secured international recognition on February 13, 1885, presenting the Congo Free State as a humanitarian mission to end the Arab slave trade and bring Christianity to dark lands. In reality, Leopold's charter granted him absolute authority over an area larger than Europe. He appointed the Force Publique, a mixed force of Congolese conscripts led by European officers to enforce his policies. The army answered only to him, bypassing any Belgian parliamentary oversight. This institutional arrangement allowed a single man to dictate law, tax, and punishment across millions of lives. By the mid-1890s, the global demand for rubber exploded, driven by automobile tires and industrial machinery. Leopold saw an opportunity to turn the Congo into the world's most profitable rubber plantation without paying wages. He imposed brutal quotas. Villages had to deliver a set weight of raw latex each month or face collective punishment. The Force Publique enforced these demands with terror. Soldiers would burn entire hamlets, seize women and children, and demand proof of compliance. The most infamous method was the severing of hands from living victims, a grotesque tally that demonstrated both the victims' failure to meet quotas and the army's ruthless efficiency. Survivors recounted how soldiers forced them to cut off a hand before allowing them to leave, then displayed the mangled limbs as trophies. These practices were not isolated incidents. They were codified in orders from Leopold's administration. The quota system turned every Congolese community into a potential crime scene, and the fear it generated ensured that rubber flowed northward while human life evaporated. The first public cracks appeared when missionaries began to speak out. In 1890, George Washington Williams, an African-American pastor, published an open letter to His Serene Majesty King Leopold II, condemning forced labor and the destruction of villages he had witnessed in his own travels. His letter was dismissed as sensationalism by European newspapers, but it planted a seed of doubt. The real breakthrough came from the shipping records examined by British journalist E.D. Morel. While working for a Liverpool firm that imported rubber, Morel noticed a paradox. Massive shipments of ivory left the Congo, yet no rubber arrived in Europe despite the supposed boom. He traced the discrepancy to Leopold's private monopoly, realizing that the rubber was being extracted under forced labor and never reaching markets because it was destroyed or withheld as punishment. In 1904, Morel founded the Congo Reform Association, mobilizing public opinion across Britain and America. Simultaneously, British consul Roger Casement compiled testimonies from missionaries, traders, and survivors into what would become the Casement Report. His document detailed systematic mutilations, village burnings, and a death toll that dwarfed any single battle. Both Morel's campaign and the Casement Report turned private horror into an international scandal. When the Congo Reform Association released its pamphlets, they reached the desks of parliamentarians, journalists, and philanthropists. Public meetings in London filled with angry crowds demanding accountability. In the United States, newspapers ran front-page stories about the blood-stained rubber. Leopold responded by commissioning a massive propaganda effort. He hired artists to produce glossy postcards showing smiling Congolese workers under benevolent European supervision. He also ordered the destruction of administrative records in 1908, burning archives that could have provided concrete evidence of quotas and punishments. The intent was clear: erase the paper trail before Belgium formally annexed the territory, thereby shielding his personal fortune from scrutiny. Yet the pressure did not wane. Parliamentarians in Britain demanded an inquiry. American philanthropist William Wart Gladstone funded further investigations. By 1908, the Belgian government could no longer ignore the mounting evidence without risking its own reputation. In November 1908, under intense diplomatic pressure, Leopold relinquished his private ownership. The Congo Free State became the Belgian Congo, a formal colony administered by the Belgian Parliament. While this transition ended Leopold's direct rule, it did not instantly halt the atrocities. Many members of the Force Publique remained in place, and the rubber quotas persisted for several more years under new bureaucratic names. Nevertheless, the annexation marked a turning point. The Belgian government was forced to confront the legacy of its king's exploitation. International commissions investigated the reports, confirming that between 1890 and 1905, up to 10 million Congolese had died from violence, disease, and starvation directly linked to Leopold's policies. The scandal also sparked early human rights activism. The Congo Reform Association continued its work, influencing future colonial reforms and laying groundwork for later anti-imperialist movements across Africa. For decades after the annexation, Belgium celebrated Leopold as a nation builder. Statues of the king rose in Brussels, Antwerp, and other cities, while school textbooks praised his civilizing mission. It was only in the late 20th century that scholars began to re-examine this narrative. In 2002, the Belgian parliament issued an official apology for colonial atrocities committed under Leopold's regime, a symbolic gesture acknowledging a dark chapter long denied. Yet statues still stand, and recent protests have demanded their removal, arguing that public spaces should not glorify a man responsible for genocide. The debate echoes worldwide conversations about how societies remember oppressive histories. And the question remains: how do we reconcile economic development built on blood with contemporary values of human rights? The answer is still being written in classrooms, museums, and courtrooms across Europe and Africa. The story of Leopold's Congo is more than a historical footnote. It is a cautionary tale about the power of unchecked authority, corporate greed masquerading as philanthropy, and the ease with which atrocities can be hidden behind diplomatic language. The rubber that powered early automobiles was stained with the blood of millions, yet for decades the world turned a blind eye because those in power controlled both the narrative and the evidence. Today, as Belgium grapples with statues and reparations, the descendants of the victims continue to seek justice and recognition. Their voices remind us that history is not a closed book, but an ongoing dialogue. The suppressed shadows of the Congo Free State still stretch across continents, urging us to look beyond polished monuments and ask, whose hands are we willing to see, and whose stories will we finally let speak?